Greetings and salutations. Welcome to this episode of Playwright Spotlight. Before we begin, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment down below, and share this channel with a friend. If you're listening to us on your favorite podcast platform, be sure to leave a 5-star review and subscribe to the channel. My guest today is a playwright, poet, essayist, and librettist whose newest opera, Three Paderewskis, composed by Jenni Brandon, received its world premiere at Washington D.C.'s Kennedy Center in 2019. Is the author of more than 30 plays, from his groundbreaking Blade to the Heat to its long-awaited sequel, Members Only. He is currently at work on Ultimate Mixtape, the third play in the Blade trilogy. Other produced plays include Blood Match and Yerma in the Desert, inspired by the plays of Federico Garcia Lorca, Fortune is a Woman, the Wallowa Project, Dies y Flores, Dark Matters, Young Valiant, Joy of the Desolate, The Sinner from Toledo, Laws of Sympathy, and Ragged Time. He is developing new plays with the Wallis Annenberg Center for the Performing Arts and the Getty Villa. He's a tenured professor and associate dean of faculty at USC's School of Dramatic Arts, and the world premiere of his play Ghost Waltz opens at the Los Angeles Theater Center on May 4th through June 6th. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Oliver Mayer. Thanks for coming.
I'm so happy to be here. That was a mouthful.
It was a mouthful. Well. Thank you. Trust me, I went back and forth with the Wallowa Project so many times. It was a one, and I hope I pronounce it correctly, because if I botched it, I'm going to be really embarrassed.
I think you did great.
I appreciate it.
And there's, it's over there on the border between Oregon and Idaho.
Okay.
And it is a mountain range and a forest range that is deeper than the Amazon, thicker in terms of vegetation.
Wow, really?
People get lost there all the time. That's what that play is about.
Getting lost?
A person who gets lost, and actually a real person who got lost and was found 17 days later.
Wow.
That's pretty unheard of. Because she was over 70 when it happened to her.
Oh my goodness!
And she was missing her tennis shoes, her teeth,
wow,
and her memory. But she did survive.
Did she get any of that memory back?
From what we can tell, in drips and drabs.
Yikes! One thing that we haven't gotten to in any of the episodes is opera. So can we break into that? And have you done any musicals? Let me ask you that.
Yeah, I've worked on some musicals. I always work with music.
Sure,
so it feels to me that I'm always but I'm not doing the American musical tradition.
Sure, okay.
And when I do operas, I'm writing the libretti, I'm writing the book.
Sure.
I don't write the music, but in my head, of course, I'm hearing it. And I used to be a singer. I was a singer when I was an undergrad at Cornell. And when I went to Oxford, I sang in a choir. And so I know the vowels that work,
sure, just
from having sung them. But music for me is first and foremost.
Okay.
Even today, our daughter and my wife were on the phone, and I was listening to Respighi, and our daughter asked my wife, like, what is he listening to? She said, oh, he's always listening to something.
Sure.
Opera is deep in me. I did sing. I was a baritone. I was in love with many singers in my life. And like I say, they kind of inspire me to this moment, even to the newest piece, Ghost Waltz, that we'll be talking about. But opera feels to me to be like the version of total theater that I guess Brecht was talking about, the idea that, you've got the words, you've got the action, and you've got the music. And then everything elevates.
So why opera? And what's the difference between writing opera opposed to a musical?
I think it's just a little more highfalutin. I think they're the same urge, really. And the way I do it, I just do it to entertain. I'm not trying to, impress anybody particularly. But I guess the opera tradition goes back hundreds of years, whereas the musical tradition maybe goes back 100 years.
Sure, okay.
Like George M. Cohan or something like that. And I think also that we've gotten used to American musicals kind of adhering to certain forms, which are fine. They're just not the ones that interest me always. I just want to tell a story usually about people, and you do have to try to find the music in the people.
Right.
You have to find the poetry, and then find a way, usually align yourself with a composer who is also looking to help them sing, literally sing, but it's almost like let their soul sing.
Do you write dialogue in opera, or is it all lyric?
I write dialogue in opera.
Okay.
And there is the highfalutin term for it, they call often recitative, which is the back and forth between people before you get to the big arias, duets, trios, quartets. And I think it's the most interesting part sometimes. Of course, the arias are the singable melodies, the Puccini, whatever moments, but the recitatives set it up, and that's where the drama is. And because I'm a dramatist, I kind of dig that part the most.
Interesting. What got you to write opera? What was the thing that you said, I'm gonna?
Boy, that's just a really good question. I mean, the thing that really made me do it was commission.
Fair enough.
But earlier in my life, I sat as a kid at the music center and heard Mephistopheles of Arrigo Boito. And I remember just being like I was shot through with a spear. I couldn't move. I thought it was so unbelievable. And I went and I got the libretto, and it's all in Italian. I couldn't understand it, but I just wanted to have it. So that was probably at age 13 or 14. And ever since, I've just been, I don't know, it's not snake bit as much as I guess it is, because it is kind of a crazy obsession. But I feel it as if I'm happiest when I'm working on opera. And my wife would tell you the same, that I smile more. When I'm writing a play, I'm grumbling or whatever. But when I'm writing an opera, I'm like, wow, I came up with this fantastic rhyme and I'm feeling really good about this. So it gives me joy. And hopefully a little bit does come out when people do listen.
Sure. Now, are you writing in English, or are you writing in another language?
I write in English.
Okay.
I'm really interested in other languages, but I write in English. The new play that Ghost Waltz is a play that is about an indigenous Mexican man who really lived in the latter half of the 19th century. So he was Otomi, and he spoke of Nahuatl, which is an indigenous language of Mexico. And then Spanish is part of it because he lived in Mexico. But of course, it's almost entirely in English, but little moments in Spanish. And then he's in love with a singer in the piece, and so she sings in Italian. There's a German professor, and I know I'm probably forgetting another language. And that is a kind of example of what interests me, because I feel like all of our languages are intertwined, and so many of us are immigrants that we bring our languages with us. And some of the languages, I think, cater a little better to some of the feelings we have. I'm very happy in English, but I don't feel that it suffices. That's why I'm always trying to do a little more.
Sure. So now, is Ghost Waltz, is it an opera?
It's a play with music, but it's got a lot of music.
Okay.
And we've got the people to do it. I've been dreaming about this for decades, and I've been writing like this now. And this time, this is a play about a world-class virtuoso violinist from his moment, happened to be a Mexican man who composed waltzes like Strauss. And so I need a violinist, and I've got a man named Quetzal Guerrero, who is a world-class violinist, who has his own band. Then I need someone to play Scott Joplin, the ragtime pianist. Well, we got Ricky Peugeot, who's Christina Aguilera's and Madonna's pianist, playing the part. Then I need a love interest who's an opera singer and indigenous and dark-skinned and beautiful. And we found somebody from the Dominican Republic. Her name is Natalie Peña Comas. And so we've got the people, and they're going to be performing as well as being in the play. So it's intertwined. It's not concert, but there are moments when it feels like concert. When Natalie sings, I feel like, wow, I should be dropping $100 for this, because it's really beautiful. Yeah. And, and it's all in the service of the story of her character and the man who was in love with her. So they're doing my play, but they're also kind of, celebrating the music of the moment, which is Strauss and Puccini, Juventino Rosas, and others. It's fantastic.
It sounds like it's a huge production with a huge budget. Is that the case, or?
I would say it's a huge production with a huge budget for a company that is not, endowed the way that others in this town, or certainly in other cities, are endowed. The Latino Theater Company is endowed with spirit and love and gumption, courage. But no, look, they got a big grant, and I'll get it wrong, but I think it's one of the film companies has given them a big grant, which they use to commission me and 10 other writers in a group called the Circle of Imaginistas. And so that came, I think, like I say, it's Hollywood money. But yeah, this is a company that's often strapped, that really, they when they have it, they use it. They put it into the work. And I'm really, really hoping that the city comes out for them. Not just for me, of course for me, but for the company, for the other plays that are being done at this period, and kind of like maybe this and to come, particularly with the Mark Taper not functioning, particularly with ticket prices being where they are, whether you want to see Fat Ham or whatever you might want to see in town at the moment. This is an affordable ticket price, and this is going to be, I think, entertainment at a really high level. Something I've only dreamt about, really.
Sure. Well, no, I mean, just you're listening off the cast, and like the cast alone sounds like it's a huge budget.
Mind blowing. And yes, I mean, the fact that we're pulling it off the way we are, of course, it's according to union and everything is above board. It's amazing. And we'll see what we can do. I'm going to touch wood while I talk, but I haven't been this excited about a show in a long time. And I do stay busy. I'm writing something every year and producing something every couple of years. But I'm really, really excited to see what happens when we all come together.
What keeps you motivated to be able to write something once a year?
It's obsessive, and it's maybe because I'm not very good at anything else. But I found playwriting at 19. I'm about to turn 59, and it is the thing that I do. If I don't do it for a while, I start to get antsy. And when I do it, I like to do 2 or 3 plays at the same time, because I know that some of them are going to crash into the wall. Some others are going to, maybe move quickly but not have a life. And others, I just have to keep gardening them, harvesting them, working on them, tilling them, loving them over a period of time. But I guess I just love the immediacy of the form. I prefer it to films, prefer it to television. I've had a little experience in both, and I far prefer the stage experience. I love actors, even though they drive me crazy. And I married one who drives me crazy, but
in the best way,
in the very best way. And I guess I'm willing to give up any monetary security for the idea that the play is central, that the playwright and the vision and the words and the images are central. And then I'm willing to give and take come from that point on. And I'm not comfortable usually in Hollywood where I'm jobbed in and some producer can tell me, well, start on page 10 and then go back and change their names. And yeah, I'm not, it doesn't make me happy.
Sure. For those that do hit the wall and crash, are they forever put in a drawer? Are they abandoned, or do you just, I'll come back to this when I'm ready?
I believe that they are still alive, and I, maybe water them every so often. But yes, they're not necessarily, because I'm always working on something new. And sometimes I've even forgotten about some of the plays that I may have done 6, 10, 12 years ago, which come back around. Somebody will remind me. About a month ago, I was in Santa Catalina with some professors from USC, including a physics professor who's Cuban. And I'm like, oh, I wrote a play about a Cuban physicist.
Was it him?
It might as well have. And it was 10, 12 years ago. And I had forgotten in a lot of ways that because I move on and do something else. So I dug it out and gave it to him. And it's kind of alive again because, I don't know, he was interested and he didn't hate it.
Sure. I find that, at least in opera, that there's some language that's a little bit more lyrical and a little more musical. And I sometimes find that English is not that way when it comes to opera. How do you make it as lyrical and find that musicality when it comes to the English language?
You're correct. And I mean, I guess we share this with German too. German is maybe a slightly more guttural kind of language to sing. Well, I mean, it's our language. So we have to, in a certain way, make peace to begin there. I'm not fluent in Italian.
Sure.
My Spanish is iffy at best. I'm Mexican American, but I never really learned my Spanish language. My wife is Cuban, and her family, when they lived with us, made me speak Spanish, but that's not like that right now. So my Spanish is all to hell again. So I just have to remember what it was like to sing, and to try to remember the order of vowels that are more singable. It's not that I can always produce it, but I try to have that as an ideal, even as I'm trying to tell whichever story demands being told. And occasionally I got to give someone some kind of whopper, almost like your bio that you had to read. They're going to have to sing the damn thing. And sometimes I'm like, well, I got to cut that. That's awful. And they're like, no, that's the part I like the best, because it is a tongue twister, because it's a challenge. English is a challenge to write in when you're writing music, but it's worthy. I
mean, do you play with just the would you use like a row of monosyllabic words that you might want to you play with the speed of, to where it just kind of, maybe it gives them a little musicality to more, opposed to more polysyllabic words? I don't, and I don't know if staccato comes into that play, because I'm not musically literate.
You're doing great. I mean, there is a science to this, and people a lot smarter than me figured it out. People like Gilbert and Sullivan.
Sure.
So even before American musicals, there was that kind of operetta, which was very musical-like. Right. And so let's say 3 and 4 syllable words tend to be funnier. So the rhymes are, and if you're not being funny, you might find in a certain way people laughing or giggling when you don't want them to, which, by the way, might be okay. So yes, when you're talking monosyllabic, rhyming, or a certain kind of meter to it, I think it's more the way you and I are speaking now.
Okay.
And maybe 2-syllable rhymes are really nice on the ear. But once you start getting to 3 and 4, 5, you're doing it for effect. Mm-hmm. Even some of the way that, if I were to start dropping a bunch of 5-syllable words on us right now, you'd think, what's wrong with, what's the feet son of a gun is this guy? And it's sort of the same thing when people sing like that.
Interesting. I'm fascinated by this. So you've written three operas, and now we've got Ghost Waltz.
Yeah.
What was the inspiration? Because you said you're really excited about it. So had that excitement been there from the beginning, or were there just certain things that all of a sudden it's like, okay, I'm getting there. I'm finding all these new discoveries, and all of a sudden there's this build, and it's just, everything's just coming out. Like, talk about this process. Or
the process was special. It's been 2 years, pretty much to the day. I got invited into this commissioned group from the Latino Theater Company where I've worked before, and they let us have our own ideas, but they presented us with some ideas. And one of the presented ideas was about this man, Juventino Rosas, this indigenous Mexican composer who did not get the due that he deserved to this day. And I thought, well, that's interesting. I was more interested with the passion with which they presented it. But I had some other ideas. Anyway, the night before I was supposed to present my ideas, I had a dream about Juventino. And I got up and I wrote a page of dialogue and a page of imagery, and I showed it to my wife. She said, damn, you got to do this one. She wanted me to do another one. And so I said, all right, okay, I'm going to do this one. And I wrote it quickly, and I felt great about it. And we presented it, and they didn't like it. And I thought, what's wrong with them? Because I thought, this is really great. Come on. And I really, I took their notes, company notes, and took time to sort of get comfortable. And within about a month or two of that experience, I reframed the piece. And that's when I started to get excited. And my director, Alberto Barbosa, I think joined me in the excitement. And we realized that we were dealing with a character who deserved his moment, and that this was the moment. And I don't know if you feel the same way I do, but and I'd hate anyone to think this was lip service, but it feels as if indigenous stories and indigenous rights deserve their moment. People talk about land rights all the time, But I think that's talk, unless you really tell stories and also let indigenous people tell their own stories.
All right.
But of course, a lot of us have indigenous blood, Mexicans or whatever we might be from in the American continent. And I feel as if we can connect. And I don't also see that you don't have to be indigenous to connect with an indigenous story. But there's something about the cosmology that a lot of indigenous cultures share about living and dying, about a connectedness with people who came before you, with animals, with the earth as we know it, that we need to remember right now as we're sort of screwing it all up.
Yeah.
And feels to me like this is a good year to tell this story. This young man was firmly what Otomi, which was a warrior band of Mexican indigenous people, 1,000 years old. But he was a musician, and he loved what he did. In 26 short years, he wrote lots and lots of music, but this one piece over all others, piece called Over the Waves. And if you heard it right now, you'd be like, oh my God, he wrote that? Because it's so famous.
Wow.
Every time you go to the circus, you hear it. If you turn on cartoons on Saturday morning, it'll come on. And for that matter, if you for one reason or other, listening to light music, kind of Strauss, like waltzes, it'll come on. And people don't realize who the man was and also what he had to go through, because he had to prove, even in his own time, that he was worthy of writing that music, which obviously came out of his soul. But because he was brown-skinned, because he came from relatively nowhere, not from the conservatories of Europe, people didn't believe him. He had to prove it.
Wow. You said you had to reframe it. What does that mean that you reframed it? Where was it before, and what did it turn into when you reframed it?
I often think about frames, and I try to, as a professor, I try to teach it. It's not easy to teach, but I think it's simpler than the thought. The doing is simpler. When I think of a frame, I think about going to the museum, or for that matter, even just looking out the window, that the sky is out there if you're looking out the window, but when you look out the window, you're looking through the frame of the, in the wall where the glass is, or even if it's open. If you're at the museum, the frame within which your painting is, and it's gilt or it's wood or it's nothing but glass, but still there's a frame, and there's something outside the frame which is not that image, and then within the image you can focus. So I think that's where it's really at. When you reframe a story, you're reframing to focus on what you want the audience to see and what you want people to understand. And in a certain way, you're cutting out or backgrounding other stuff that's not as important. So when I first told this story, I was really taken by the kind of wild, epic story going from, because he went from Mexico to New Orleans to Chicago to Cuba in a short time. And I thought, wow, isn't this great? And I had all this stuff going on. And I realized in the end that other stuff was taking away from the really important story that this young man was living, that we need to learn from, which is that, we need to, trust people's talent. We need to believe them when they say stuff and they can prove it. We need to go easy on ourselves, much less on people around us who, may come from humble beginnings, but have something to offer. We need to listen to each other. And so when I realized that some of that other stuff was taking away from his luster, then I kind of took it out of the frame. He still does all those things. He did everything he did in the earlier versions, but I'm just focusing on him. And then maybe the people he loves and the people that rival him, someone like a Scott Joplin, who happened to be the same age, and both of them were people of color who were, if you ask me, music trailblazers.
Okay, so would it be correct, because I really I'm fascinated by this concept of reframing. So would you say that it's more of like, hypothetically, let's say that you have a 16 by 20, but you've got so much going on that right now what you really need to do is make it an 8 by 10. Or are you saying, let me shift this over a little bit because there's some stuff that's on the outside that I need to capture, so let me get some of that other stuff that's outside the frame and bring it in or is it a little bit of both?
It's a brilliant question. I love it because you make me think, what I would say it is it may be a moving frame. Which makes it sound like a film.
Sure, yeah.
But that you focus where you want the audience to be, which happens to be on this man, And maybe this man's experience, this man's like, I don't know, point of view. So it is sounding very cinematic. And then maybe the frame moves, because it feels as if, like you said, 16 by 20 to 8 by 10 or 5 by 8, 4 by 6. But it doesn't stay there because we still flow into the world. The world continues to, I don't know, unfold all around him. He was in New Orleans when jazz was being formed, and his song was really important. He was in Chicago for the World's Fair, which was the meeting of the world. It happened to be 1893, and the light bulb was new, and so many things that we are so used to were just being born. He went to Cuba just before the revolution. Unfortunately, died there. So all of that stuff demands the 16 by 20. But I think the experience, particularly at the beginning and maybe at the end, and maybe in the middle of almost the 4 by 6 or 3 by 5, and then we explode it and we bring it back. So it's maybe a folding and unfolding frame.
Okay. Wow. How has opera developed your playwriting?
It's a great question. I think it's opened my heart, which is essential for me to keep writing after 40 years and to keep wanting to do more. Opera for me was, and probably for a lot of people, I used to watch my dad listen to La Boheme and just weep. And I remember at an early age thinking, what's he crying about? And then a little later saying, oh, I think I understand. He's really into the music. The music is taking him places. And then it began to take me places too. So, and I liked where I was going. So I maybe have advanced or changed in some of the music I listen to. I don't listen to as much opera as I used to, but the example of opera opened me to a kind of vulnerability, a kind of soaring, kind of elevating attempt at bringing people along with you, musically as well as textually. I'm not satisfied with the theater as a purely kind of conversation or text-based form. I'm always telling my students, yeah, this is great, the dialogue is wonderful, but what am I looking at? What's really going on? Metaphorically, what can you show me? I even tell them, when you see something, say something. When you're writing, your play, and if you see something, write that down, because that's important, because that is as or more important as the dialogue, the brilliant, riposte that someone might have for someone's line. I want to know if it's yellow. I want to know if they're outside or inside. I want to know if there's a knife nearby. And if you see that stuff, you got to put it down. So I believe I learned that because, again, opera is a little more of that total theater, a little bit more of that kind of everything goes. There's dance, there's romance, there's sex, there's lots of violence. There's, like spiritual stuff. There's life and death, and I'm into it.
Sure. Yeah, I don't listen to as much opera as I'd like to. I'm a huge fan of Live at the Met on 91.5, on Saturdays. And
shout out to them.
Yeah,
they're great.
But I forget sometimes, because there's nothing better than a good spring day, good spring morning, and just kind of put on the opera. It's lovely. Are there any rituals that you go through every time you write? Like, this is here. I have to be playing this. I have to have my cup of coffee. What are some rituals that you
Well, whatever rituals I've had over the years have been stood on their head by my cat, who.
So your cat's one of them?
Yeah, my cat, who is really demanding, will today, multiple times, jump on my desk, not unlike yours, start chewing on the erasers of my pencils, stick a paw in my coffee, knock stuff over. And I guess I love him enough. I haven't strangled him. I think about it, but I don't. And he, of course, makes me laugh.
Sure.
So whatever I considered precious in a certain way, I've got to give over because, And I think there's something kind of, that's a life lesson in that.
Sure.
And I guess I learned to write not too far from where we're doing this podcast. I grew up in the San Fernando Valley. And when I started writing, I don't know, dramatic literature of one kind or another, I was taking the bus from North Hollywood High to CSUN for a class. So I kind of learned how to write on a crosstown bus. So for me, I'm not precious. I'm always walking around. I've got a notebook right here, which I can always keep in a breast pocket, and I'll write something down. And if I get a couple of good lines, then that was a good day. And oftentimes it's what other people say, because I'm not that smart, but I am a good listener. If somebody says something, or if I see a sign that's funny, or I remember something, that's writing for me. But when it's time to, like, the commission needs to get done or something, I will sit for hours and hours upon end, and often forget that happened. For me, it's just like minutes, but it's hours. So even if the cat is kind of walking on my, on my implement, then it's okay. Because in another place, I'm kind of outside time, and I've been able to carve out a life where that's okay. Like, I'm a professor, and I'm, when I'm not teaching, when I don't have office hours, they want me to write.
Sure.
And I married a woman who wants me to write. And I've got enough friends at this point to know that, I'm really good to catch a basketball game or a boxing match or something. Those are things I love. But I got to write.
How do you find that balance?
I make it. And at this point, again, it's like I don't apologize. But I also know, again, that, it's a priority for me, but among other priorities, students, family, health. And so I'm not going to kick myself too much, where I might have 20 years ago. Sure. Feel like, oh, well, you're wasting your time. I know now that's not a waste of time. To take care of people or to be taken care of is not a waste of time.
Sure.
To occasionally get a good meal, which I often forget to do. That's the other thing. That may be one of the things that happens when I write. I forget to eat. So, and then I might be tearing someone's head off and realize, I think I should have eaten today.
I want to go back to the book. How detailed is it? Whatever you write on that page? Because it seems to me that, there's been times I got to write that down, but I lose the context. I'm like, I don't even know what that meant.
But that's okay.
So, yeah. So, what do you do with it then?
I make a new context. I just keep these things. I keep them, and I sometimes reuse them because it may have been in the wrong context, although I thought it was the right context the first time I put it down. But I keep it around me. I've got untold of these books all around. And, then I'm writing on the back of envelopes too and everything else. Sure. So, yeah, it gets lost. But in another way, I feel as if it's not lost. The act of writing, and I do prefer a pen and paper. I think it is the best technology known to man. Nothing against my laptop. I enjoy it too. But this is better, that the act of writing makes it so, and it will come back to you. It will come back to you, I know, although not necessarily in the context that you originally had created. I'm into kind of happy confluences, kind of just almost like it's not quite you wish and you make it so, but that it's there when you need it. That's where I'm spiritual. I'm super spiritual about the idea that when you need something, it is there for you. And I try to model that, not just with students, but just even with my fellow artists. Because I do know that some people suffer terribly. Because I think we really beat ourselves up. Like, oh, this is not going the way I thought it would, or my life isn't, or my art isn't. But it's going the way it's going. And we need to celebrate that it's going at all.
Yeah, no, 100%. There was I don't know if I should invoke his name these days, but there was Kevin Spacey had done a quote in a magazine, and it was just talking about like you're where you're supposed to be You just have to come to the realization of that, and then just learn how to get out of your own way. So, you know.
Oh, I hope he listened to himself.
Exactly. So that was going to be my question, because when you mentioned your cat chewing on your erasers, that made me want to know if you wrote by hand when you were writing.
I do it all. I write pencil on a notebook. I have a pen, and I'm writing it out kind of longhand. I've got a laptop, and sometimes I'll even use two screens. I guess my iPad is open sometimes too. I'm listening to music, and sometimes music that makes my family crazy. What else is going on? Of course, we're being interrupted constantly.
Sure.
That's the other thing that's great about plays, is I feel that plays are about interruptions. Because I feel, for the most part in our lives, that's all that happens. The last time I was able to finish thought, I don't remember when. And that's okay. Now, maybe when you put music to it, although I do think interruptions in music are really powerful, but you do kind of want to get through the sort of musical arc of a song before you interrupt it. But in plays, I'm really in an interruption because it just feels real. And the interruption often, you think, well, it deprived me of my opportunity to finish a sentence. But what it actually did is it gives you the opportunity to build on that interruption and maybe do something even better. Maybe something that's shared. Maybe something that's inspired.
Okay. What are some of the things that you have to, the habits that you have to break your students out of?
Ooh, wow. Not to tell tales. The biggest one is, and I was guilty of it, is that writers and their wit, our wit, that when we cobble something with a bump, a kind of a button, something salacious, something cheeky, witty, that my students often think that's often the end of the act, or the end of the scene, end of the act, end of the play. And I often have to tell them, no, that's the beginning. Now you've actually opened a seam, and it's up to you to keep breaking through. It's up to you to worry a hole into that thing that you just created with your wit. All right, you just created something, you got my attention. It's usually after a bunch of introduction. This is with early writing.
Sure.
And to this moment in my life, I might do the same thing. I'll write a whole bunch of stuff that's not very interesting in order to get to a moment. But I know that, okay, now I'm onto something. Now don't let go. So that is the biggest note I probably give my students, is don't let go. Trust yourself, but don't let go. And this question of what dramatic action is it's another moving target. What might be for me is not for you. But I need you to know what it is for yourself. The thing that in a certain way, is exciting, questioning, problematizing for you, that you got to know what happens next. That's the not letting go part. And then you got to go for it. And if that makes you more like Genet, if that makes you more like Arthur Miller, that makes you more like, Annie Miller, that's fine by me. Annie Baker. That's fine by me. You just, you got to go for it. And I love the difference in people's voices. That's why I feel like everyone should write at least one play. It's totally crazy to write 40 like I have, but write one or two, because you should. And again, plays are this wonderful kind of open-ended, gigantically immediate art form where it's always happening in the now, where you can kind of do some self-therapy, kind of deal with the stuff that you're walking around with, and actually get it out on the page, get it out on the stage, and help someone else too.
Sure, right, yeah. Where do you start when you sit down? You've got your idea. Do you start at the beginning, or do you start, I've got a scene. I know this scene. I'll worry about how I get there later. And then I know where it goes, but I'll worry about what happens after. I mean, where do you start when you sit down with an idea?
I'm gigantically open-ended. I don't storyboard. I don't work out where it's all going. But I feel the attack is really, really important. And so very seldom does for the plays that get done, they get finished, the plays that people like tend to be plays where I have no idea where it was going, but I did know where I wanted to start. I felt like this is a moment deserving of other people's attention, not simply my own. But that doesn't mean it's always like some kind of public explosion. It can be just something private between people. Sure. But it's a moment where people kind of, I don't know, where the mask falls. It has to be a moment where the mask falls. Even early on, where we have whatever the customary rituals that we go through every day. Yeah, we need a page or two of that so we know that we're dealing with human beings in a moment. But at some point, I know, if I may not know the words, but I know something has to happen where the mask falls, where we see something, what's really going on with somebody.
What does that look like?
It's usually they didn't mean it. Because if I think it's unconscious. If it's conscious, then that's interesting, but that means that it's something strange. If it's an unconscious revelation of a secret, of a dream, of a hope, of a fear, of a desire, then I got a sense who that person is, and I got a sense now. Okay, what can I do in this play to make them face their fears, make them put obstacles in front of what they want, and to threaten out their secrets. And that becomes my MO. As soon as it takes usually a page or two to find a moment to break through their mask of normalcy.
And we're not talking the same, this isn't subtext.
I don't think it's subtext.
Okay. I'm trying to really just kind of...
I don't think it's subtext. I think it's the way that it's character. It's character. Mm-hmm. It's the way we present ourselves. What we hope to see when we look in the mirror. We look in the mirror in other people's eyes, we hope they see in us. I'm talking about myself, of course. Sure. So I have to find a way to break through my own bull. I have to find a way to break through my own moves, my own anecdotes. I have to find a way to get to experience. I have to find a way to get to unfinished feelings. In a certain way, unvarnished truths. That's why it's weird to be, let's say, working in verse, where you think, well, you have to finish things and they have to be beautiful. I often think verse doesn't need to be beautiful. Verse needs to be unfinished and broken, and perhaps even, like you didn't know that you would say those things. You certainly didn't plan upon it. Like I didn't plan to be saying this right now to you, sure. But it's what kind of is. That's, I think, why we really sit in a room together, is we're waiting for those moments to happen, whether they're sung or they're acted, whether they're mumbled. Well, you need to be able to hear them a little bit.
Sure.
But when they're owned, and that's why it's important that someone else is witnessing it. When two people are in a scene and someone reveals themselves, and then it's the consequence of that revelation, I think, is what's going to make the play.
Does that come from reaction? Is that when that occurs, that drop of the mask, in whatever that reaction is to that, whatever that moment?
Yeah, and I think it's more complicated than the character usually realizes. I think the character, probably like I would think in a moment that would make me blush or humiliate me or scare me, that I wish wouldn't happen, that in that moment, the person on the other end of the table will hate me. Well, that may not be the reaction. And the fact that the character, who at this moment might be me, is wrong-footed to some extent, is what now creates a new dance. Like we thought we were just in an interview, or we thought we're just in a podcast. Now we're doing something else.
Right.
And now we're doing something else that we kind of got to make ourselves. And then if I'm writing about an historical character, well, I do got to go back to historical moments. But I feel that was true even then in 1890. Sure. Something in Ghost Waltz, or, I see behind you the book about Machiavelli. I wrote a play about Machiavelli. That was like 500 years ago. But, they were doing what we're doing.
You don't look that old. That's pretty good for your age.
Yeah, what can I tell you?
How much creative license do you take with these things?
Lots.
Okay.
Lots.
All right.
Look, I try to do the work. I try to read and get a sense of where people were at what times, because it provides opportunities. But then if it's possible that a meeting might have taken place that maybe some historians said didn't, but boy, the drama makes it a lot better if it did, well, they're going to meet, because I don't pretend to write documentaries. It's the last thing I want anyone to think. Don't come to my plays expecting this to be, I don't know, treatises or academic work or anything like that. No, these are plays.
Stephen Dietz wrote a wonderful Inventing Van Gogh, which he took a lot of creative license, but it was a brilliant piece.
Yeah.
You know, I really enjoyed it. You know, when you sit down and you're writing, do you just? I'm just going to get through all the dialogue first, and then I'll add those little details later, or are you writing stage directions as you go as well? And how detailed are your stage directions? Are they limited? Is it just a parenthetical here and there, or is it, how much are you throwing on the page?
This is what I had said earlier about if you see something, say something. Mm-hmm. So if I see it, I got to write it down. Now I've found something that works for me to try to write less than more, maybe write slightly poetically in stage directions so that it inspires the director, the audience to imagine what it might be towards suggesting what something is. Occasionally you just got to say, hey, it's yellow. Hey, it's blue. Hey, that's a knife.
Right.
What I do is when I'm, harried, when the cat is jumping too much, or when I'm late, somebody needs this script, or I got to get to class and I'm going to be fighting traffic, is I may suddenly start just writing the dialogue just to write it down, just to get it there. And then I know I got to go back and really do that thing I ask of my students. What are we looking at? Where are they again? Why are they talking so much? Why didn't somebody interrupt them? And then I really do ask myself, even today when I was doing some edits, I'm like, how can that person talk so much? There's going to be an interruption. There just has to be.
Does that have to be a third character?
It could be anything. Okay. It could be a bird. And sometimes it is. It's just, we interrupt ourselves.
Sure.
I mean, I do. I know maybe I'm crazy, but I'll interrupt myself because I know whatever I'm saying is not as interesting as something else that I'd rather do or rather say.
Right. When is it time to end a scene?
That's a good question. Whenever you get to a place where you're repeating yourself, then you know you've gone too far. And then I would say once you've gotten that feeling, then you probably want to back up a little more than that. But it depends. Once you get towards, I don't know, conclusions or some of those formal moments where you do need to take stock, it's okay to go back. A little repetition's okay. And someone a lot smarter than me once told me that, if you do something good in a play, don't do it just once, do it twice, because otherwise they'll think it was an accident. And I believe that. Sometimes 3. Rules of 2s and 3s, which are TV film rules, are not bad in the theater either. But it shouldn't be the same joke or the same image. It can be the same image, but it's changed over time. It means something different to characters based on what they've been through, or something's been altered a little bit, even though it looks the same.
Okay. What's an example of a rule of 2?
Rules of 2 are when you, often in TV, that you, again, it's a joke, it's an image, it's perhaps it's a story moment. One of those things that makes a difference. It's not just that, like most writing is, which is in between those. It's one of those kind of memorable moments. And because you did it once, you're going to usually you do it early and you try to do it late.
Got it.
It means sometimes you do it in the middle. And they become, the way I think about it when I'm writing is they become like the what you do when you're putting up a circus tent. You got to hammer
right.
whatever they call those stakes in order for the tent to rise.
Right.
And I've actually been around some circus people when they did that, and it takes a lot of work. And of course, that's everything, because if that tent goes down, there's a lot of liability. And so those are the moments, and so those rules of 2s and 3s become foundational. but I don't want to think about it too much because then I get all nervous.
You've got the Blade trilogy at this point, not to be confused with Wesley Snipes' series. That would be kind of entertaining to see on stage.
It's often confused on online. If you Google it, you'll get nothing but Wesley Snipes.
They're interconnected. How is it a continuation of the last play? Is there a time jump? Are we revisiting things? Are you setting it up that it's going to continue? What's that look like as far as the plays, a stage play goes? And then how much time in the real world has passed, and how do you deal with people who may not have seen the first one?
Yes.
Talk about that.
These are good questions. So Blade to the Heat was the play that kind of started my career for me. It was not my first play, but it was my first big play. And that was produced in New York in 94 and LA in 96. And it's been produced off and on since. And probably the only one of my plays that's had that kind of life. Although I've had other plays that have been produced more than once, but still, that play is big for me. And it was set in the late 50s. It involved a young Mexican-American who was a boxer, wins a title, and whose sexuality is called into question by his opponent, actually by a third opponent who gets the second opponent crazy about it, and about whether he's gay or not.
Sure.
And this is the 50s, early 60s, so you can't be gay. Whether you're gay or not, you can't be gay, except that he is. And so it creates, tragedy ensues, but in an exciting and scary and evocative way. So that play was great for me. And I wrote all these other plays. I didn't want to be the guy who just wrote that play over and over. But people would always be like, well, maybe you should write another play like that. And finally, good 15 years later, I realized that was a way I could continue that story. And I allowed a 20-year gap in the character Pedro Quinn's life the way it was for me. I knew that by the time I'd get it done, it'd be about 20 years, and it was. So that in maybe 2017, 2018, when we did Members Only, it was roughly 22 years later, about the same for my character. So this young man was now a man hitting 40, and the 60s were now the early 80s, and he had to deal with AIDS. And I was a young writer during the time of Angels in America.
Sure.
I happened to know Tony a little bit. I was working at the Mark Taper when he was working on his Angels in America plays, and it made a big effect upon me, as it did everybody.
Sure.
So, and of course, I lived through the AIDS years and lost people, as people did, and was scared about my own sexuality, about, just my own, if I'd live or not, as a young person during those times. So I was able to kind of mainline that, put that into Quinn's experience. And he was in more danger than I ever was. And so the Members Only play, I thought, worked well with a 20-year gap in my own life and in the gap of the character's life, and furthered the theme of sexuality, hidden sexuality, and how it comes out in the dangers really well. Now, the third play is not produced yet. Still working on it too. And that play jumps only a few years. And I think I bring him to maybe about 45. And the Ultimate Mixtape is the mixtape that I'm trying to remember the name. It was, what's his name? The wonderful scientist who say billions and billions was that wonderful man. Tip of my mind. He had a romance with a wonderful young person, and he was creating a mixtape that they were sending into space, into the next galaxy.
Interesting.
And that is the Ultimate Mixtape.
You're talking Carl Sagan?
Carl Sagan.
Yeah.
And it's got, Bach, but it's got the sounds of dolphins, and it's got the poetry of amazing poets, and it's got different languages. So it is the Ultimate Mixtape. And the other thing is that all of these plays are full of music. The first play was full of Jackie Wilson and early salsa. The second play was full of disco. And this play will have an ultimate mixtape of its own, but of course I've got to get it done first.
Sure. It's funny because I think when I practiced reading your bio a couple of times, I think I actually said ultimate sex tape.
Yeah, well.
Totally different play. So let me ask you this then, because now is this just, when you say a lot of music, are we saying that is it transitional music? Is it music in the background that's playing while the scene's going on? Is it part of the scene where they're like, it's playing on a radio, or are they singing it? How are you using it? And then how are you getting away with the use?
So
is this become an ASCAP thing?
Oh, well, now I'm in trouble. The first play had a character named Garnet who sang the Jackie Wilson songs because he was a Jackie impersonator. He was a local guy singing those songs, and Quinn, who was in love with him, loved those songs, and they bonded on the songs. They were just two guys loving the songs who eventually kind of came together. And so that was perfect. And then the salsa that we used was what everybody listened to, and we had dance transitions. Members Only, where it was the period of disco, we had a real club scene that was part of the play, and so that just has to get piped in.
Sure, yeah.
And I'm trying to remember, I think I used some Laurie Anderson.
Okay.
Sorry, Laurie. It's been a few years now. I don't know if we paid you for that or not. And we used, we also used a lot of, I don't know if you know Willie Colon, but it's very kind of Puerto Rican, New Yorican music of the moment. Very kind of sexy, late night, kind of Bronx, Harlem, Spanish Harlem kind of music. And yeah, I mean, we just used it. And this last one, the character of Garnet resurfaces. So there'll be the opportunity for more live performance.
Sure.
And at this point, we're into 1990. Right. So we're dealing with it's the era of Prince and Michael Jackson.
Right.
And so I don't know. We'll see what happens.
Nice. All right. Yeah. Yeah. I wasn't sure exactly how that comes into play. I mean, obviously, it's like, I mean, for me, I mean, music's always a huge transitional thing, as far as like, because a lot of the festivals that I produced were dealing with one act. So obviously there's a small scene change and you can't do it in silence. So, usually, we'll have an outro for whatever the last play is, and then we'll have an intro into the new piece as it begins. So, I'm not going to deny that I'm not guilty of the exact same things. It's small theater. Well, small for some, bigger than others.
But it is really the way that we work. That we rehearse. We probably don't choose the music for good until usually the day or two before people start to see it. Yeah. Then we're up for only a few weeks. So by the time we were to necessarily write to the powers that be and for them to get back to us, the show's already done.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And who's showing up? Nobody representing from ASCAP's going to show up to, shut down some play.
Except now that we're talking about it.
Yeah, maybe. I want to talk about Federico Garcia Lorca.
Oh, gosh.
So, because it's inspired by the play. So, are these translations? Are they adaptations? And then, how much of the story are you remaining true to the story, or are you kind of taking creative license with these as well, and just kind of making a whole new play based on his work?
Well, I've grown into this. So when I first wrote Blood Match, which is a version of Blood Wedding, I translated, because I can actually read Spanish better than speak it. Okay. So I translated it myself. I had about 3 or 4 different other translations around me, but I made it mine. And I was writing for a particular company, Urban Theater Project, Urban Theater. And so I knew who the company was, and I think they even asked me to set it in Mexico, even though Lorca is Spanish and it was a play from the 1930s. I thought it fit well. And I put it in a certain Mexico that I was interested in, which is Sinaloa, which is where a lot of the drug cartels have been, and some of the TV shows that everybody watches are around that part of the world. But I was not necessarily dealing with the drug traffickers. I was more interested in some of the farmers who farmed the poppies. So I changed those particulars, but I adhered to the story of Blood Wedding because it's so good, and it's so elemental, and scary, and sexy, romantic, all that stuff that shows up in the original Lorca, and Lorca being so probably better than anybody at talk about text and subtext, but talking about how people really are in relation to how they feel about each other, what they're willing to do, when their sexuality is kind of overriding their rationality. So anyway, I really had a good time with that. Play went really well. And then the second time I grabbed onto Lorca was with, I think probably his greatest play for me, Yerma. Yerma is this female character who wants a baby above all things, and it's the most heartbreaking character I think I've ever read. And when the play's done well, you're just broken. So I thought, well, I love that character. But this time I decided to take her into our present day. I called my play Yerma in the Desert.
All right.
And I set it in LA or in the Southwest. And I happened to be not just professoring, but living on campus as faculty and residents at USC. And I had this angle on living there. This freshman students were in the building that I was in with my wife, and the custodial staff, who were almost entirely of color, very many from Mexico. And I thought, wow, Yerma, if Yerma were a custodian in the original, she washes clothes by the brook, and she's, poverty-stricken. But in this case, she's working a low-wage job, custodial, and enduring those indignities. I began to see connections. And then her big question is, she's dying to have a child. She'll die to have a child. She'll kill to have a child. And it's not happening for the people around her. And I realized, wow, if she's on a university campus, there's opportunities for all the people that are dealing with, all the scientists and all of the medical doctors, and the possibilities of in vitro and the labs and all of this. The possibilities are there. So I had to open up the play.
Wow.
So suddenly Yerma is living in 2024, or if not then a few years earlier, where the possibilities, even for someone who might be stuck into loyalties, maybe the wrong marriage and maybe the wrong religion, would still, she wouldn't be able to just be rock solid that way. And if she were, then it would be more her fault than anyone else's. There are options. Still, there are realities. She's got the partner that she's got. She's stuck in some of the economic realities that people are stuck in now. But I wanted her to be in the world that we live in. So I kind of like this play, Yerma in the Desert.
Sure, yeah. Going back to Blood Match, because I know that you said it in a drug cartel-ridden town, but it's not a prominent aspect of the piece. However, does that danger still exist within the play, or do you still touch on it? Or
in the original Lorca play, there are families. There's a marriage, but the woman goes with another man who she was always in love with, and both families they want blood, and there will be blood. And so it was gangsterish, as I think Spain in that period was. I mean, Lorca was murdered for his sexuality by people he knew, by local people who didn't trust him and hated his lifestyle and had guns. So I think he was foretelling in some ways his reality. And so then to set it in a Mexican countryside, poppy fields, and some tough types, it made it easy that the kind of gangsterish behavior would come from gangsters. But they're not necessarily, that's not what the play is about. It's just the way that they, in a certain way, when they see red, they'll go after it in ways that they're trained to.
How much has your playwriting evolved over the years, from when you started to where you're at now? And were there things that were clicking at the time? Like all of a sudden it's like, oh, I get it now. You know,
I haven't got it yet, which is why
I don't know. This bio disagrees, but
I keep writing to figure it out. But I definitely have been trying to grow my voice.
Sure.
And I feel as if, there's a certain way my thumbprint, which is my DNA, which is my family, my grandparents, my experience growing up in the San Fernando Valley and living in Los Angeles, traveling, coming back home. So that's just like the data. And the data got to be true too. But the voice is something else. The voice is something that changes over time. As a singer, you lose notes over time, but maybe you gain a certain kind of gravel, a certain kind of gravitas in your voice from living. You destroy your voice with cigarettes and alcohol, and maybe getting punched in the neck a couple times. But in another way, maybe it adds luster. It adds experience. So I've been growing the voice, paying attention to my own voice all these years, and trying to maybe extend it, challenge it, try to find the notes that I might have lost and maybe find new ones. And that is a reason to keep writing. But I guess, yes, of course, I stayed in this because I was good at it. I know I am good at it. I like to teach it. I don't want my students to be like me, except maybe only in one way, that they love it. I want them to love it. I want them to keep the home fires burning. I want them to support each other, because I think, as you're sitting here too, with what you do, that the only way we further this is by listening to each other, being there for each other, sure, supporting each other. Otherwise, it'll die out. And even in my own lifetime, we've had moments, I thought, where the theater might die. It didn't. COVID might have been another example. And we found a way. Maybe it'll be better than ever now. And also, I think the imprisonment of all the screens we look at all day and night makes us want to gather together and be in a room with each other and experience things and maybe feel differently about what we just saw. So that's what I want to pass along to students and even to audiences, is maybe the spark of joy, the spark of hope to keep it going, and the courage in all of our hearts to keep it going. And that's all I really want. And just to tell the stories that, that are exciting to me.
How do you think we save LA theater? There just seems like every single time I turn around, there's another theater closing. Next Stage in Koreatown, Gregory Crafts, who was on early episode, that space just got bought. They raised their rent 700% to $15,000 a month. We can produce anything for that, the real estate here is just, and nobody appreciates theater. At least the people that own the spaces don't,
I think you have your finger right on it, which is, so the economics are crap and wrong and going the wrong direction too.
Yeah.
I love the theater, and one good thing about being in the theater is you often get free tickets, or you get
sure
breaks on your tickets. But if I were just a theater lover, have not playwright, not professor, not in the biz, and didn't get that, I don't know how I'd afford it.
Yeah.
And then much less ever go to New York. I haven't been to New York anyway in years to see a New York place, but it's prohibitive. So that's stupid. I think that's the worst mistake we could have ever made. Yeah. And my kind of bullish, maybe stupid response is, I'm going to do it for free.
Sure.
I want people to see what I'm doing. And I think that's more valuable. I never, well, not never, but in a 40-year career, a good 30, some of them, those years were realizing full well that this is not going to pay my rent.
Sure.
I have to do something else to pay my rent so that I can do this and do the things I want to do. So if I'm going to make that call, then I'm willing to do it for free.
No, 100%. And I'm right there with you, but it's just, and I will be the first one to say it's more accessible than people realized. I never realized how accessible it was. I'm just a little concerned that it's getting a little bit unaccessible just because of the prices now.
Yeah.
I can't, I mean, I could get the space that we used to produce in for $675 a weekend.
Yeah.
You can't find a space that's, I mean, down the street, I think they wanted $2,600 a weekend.
Yeah, it's painful.
So I with those prices, I mean, and the fact that the cheaper, less expensive theaters have all closed or have had to increase their prices. So, I don't mind doing it for free. I certainly didn't produce in order to make money. That wasn't going to happen. And God bless the cast and that I brought on, they never, asked for any money. And they, unfortunately, they never got it, though I would love to have paid them. But, the people that don't get the stage time, I would always, always throw a few bones to the guy who's, hanging lights, the person who's in the booth, They
got to get paid.
Yeah.
Got to get paid.
Because they're not getting the opportunity. Nobody's coming in to see look, gosh, this lighting's really good. I'm a techie, so at this theater, so I'm going to hire this. Nobody's coming in to audition a tech person, by going to see a play, but, you can get your agent, manager, or cast director to at least come see it perform. So hopefully something comes out of it in that regard.
Well, you stumped me. I mean, that is the question. It's really an impossible feat at this point to put on a play. I mean, you need help. You need the space. I mean, Latino Theater Center has been at LATC down on 5th and Spring. Mm-hmm. And I think the city gives them the space for $1 a year. But, of course, they got to light it and keep it air conditioned and keep the people, security and all of the production help and all of that staff. So it's expensive as all heck. And then all of these places, I mean, we can't make them the bad guys either, because maybe some of the owners were gouging. But I mean, it's just really hard these days. And obviously, to stay, good with the unions, LORT, and the various unions, what else are we going to do? We have to adhere. I am a believer in what I thought was maybe the great moment historically in American theater was the off Broadway scene.
Sure. Yeah.
When I think about great writers, I don't think about Broadway writers. And even off Broadway, maybe Albee was a great off-Broadway writer, but I think about off-Broadway writers all the time. I think about Irene Forness, and I think about Sam Shepard. I mean, they were the two greatest, but so many, John Guare, I mean, eventually maybe moved on to those other places, but he started that way.
For sure.
And others that, for me, laid down the gauntlet in a certain way, what it means to be a dramatist in this country. Nothing against Tennessee Williams and Arthur Miller, who I adore, but they're not, for me, in the same breath as some of these people, that I felt like I could do this. And in our world, it's Luis Valdez, here, for me, at least, in, the kind of stuff I saw in L.A. from an early age. So I know that stuff is two planks and a passion, which is, of course, a quote from Shakespeare, that Luis Valdez did his early plays on the back of a flatbed for strikers in Watsonville who had nothing else to look at. And I'm sure he did it for free. And that, Irene Forness and Sam Shepard and the great plays that they did before they became famous, they just had a street corner and they're like, hey, we'll give you a cappuccino and you can sit here and see our play. Yeah. And it costs $2. And, people came and they didn't come. It was in the back of a church. I feel as if we've got to find that again. The desire to put stuff on in alternate spaces, maybe a different kind of run.
Sure.
I'm not against short runs, because also with the kind of talent that we have in this town, which is unmatched, maybe in history, that so many people have so many other places to go. They're on tour. They have commitment with a TV or show or something, but maybe they can give you a weekend. Well, let's take it. Let's take it and let's do it. I don't mind a one-time only. It feels to me we ought to be possibly more like pop artists. I don't know, Beyonce was beyond us, but, maybe we do those kind of runs and we do those kind of tours.
Oh, God, just the idea of putting in so much work to have one performance would kill me,
You're right.
But, but at the same time, you touch on something because, I mean, is theater dead? No. Is it going to die? No, because all it takes is one performer and somebody to watch, and you've got it. But then you go back to, the wagon, with all the props and the set pieces, and this stopped in town, and we did it out in the public square, and maybe that's what it gets back to. Maybe it gets back to, theater in the park, and we're just gonna throw a flyer around, and this is where we're gonna be. Come watch. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, some of my best experiences were kind of unexpected theater. And I've done it a couple of times myself. Yeah. Not quite happenings, or, I mean, that was a very 70s term. What do they call those? There's some of those we did that kind of, people would, take the subway to a certain place and just put something on and then disperse again. There's something to be said about that. I mean, it's not necessarily what you've probably produced over your life, but maybe it does kind of, I don't know, inspire us a little bit.
Sure. And maybe that's it. Maybe it's finding in a different place, a non-traditional place where a few writers can get together, and this is where we're going to stage it. There was somebody who was talking about pub plays, which I guess was a big thing in I guess London or something like that.
I think it still is, but it was a big deal about 20 years ago.
Yeah, and so maybe it's like these,
Well, I love beer, so that sounds good.
Yeah, right? There you go. So
yeah, that would be really cool. I think that's right. But then of course the play that you give them has to be a kind of play that they're willing to listen to after a couple.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
and you have to be okay with them ordering another round while you're trying to give your big speech. Talk about interruptions again.
Yeah.
So it has to be open to that kind of experience.
That's true. Yeah.
Again, we're trying to find our audience, and it's nothing against our, elderly or blue hairs, as so many used to be called, who, keep the theater alive in this town and have for so long. Keep the Geffen going, keep Pasadena Playhouse going. I mean, the Taper's not going anymore, but it went for a long time thanks to a lot of our elderly patrons. So we've got to give them what they want, too. It feels to me, though, that there needs to be, I guess we're code switching. You're probably got to code switch as a producer, and I definitely have to code switch as a writer.
Sure.
I need to talk when I'm talking at the street corner, and talk when I'm talking at the dinner party, and talk when I'm talking at the city hall meeting, and in a certain way. And then hopefully when the play goes on, try to get all three of those congregations to come into the space. Yeah. Because otherwise the play's not going to make it. Most plays don't because you can't find an audience.
Yeah, and I don't know what the answer to that is, at least in LA. I think the smaller markets, I think they do fairly well. But
you gotta, give them a reason. In this case, with this play that we're about to do, we are really hoping that people who are not, we want, of course, all our theater lovers to attend, and we're expecting them to, but we want people who don't feel necessarily they've been invited before to feel that they can come. So we're approaching Spanish language audiences, a lot of people who may have heard of this man and not really realized. Mm-hmm. We have an extraordinary inn through a taco franchise, if you can believe it.
Oh, no,
we're really, we're making a move. And I'm really looking forward. That's one of my favorite things too about the theater, almost like a crosstown bus again, is that you sit with people who you might not otherwise be with. Yeah. You sit with people who are coming from another part of town, who do something completely different from you, and yet you're both taking in the play at the same time.
And maybe that's where immersive theater is kind of brought us as well, as being in a non-traditional setting where you're part of the play, and you're right up there, up close in a room, and you're standing and it's going on around you, and maybe they had something to that, and maybe it'll come back.
Yeah, I mean, here we are in the town of comedy and improv. I mean, the best, I guess Chicago too, but among the best. And yeah, maybe we need to learn something from them. I mean, they learned something from us. That's where they got it. Yeah. But now we have to, and I think that's the constant intermixing. When somebody does something good, they have to use it.
Sure. Yeah. Outside of Ghost Waltz, now that it's opening, what are you working on right now?
I just finished the first act of a play called Three Treasons, and I'm excited about it. We'll see what happens. But there was a man named Gonzalo Guerrero. People don't know him either. He was actually the first Spaniard to kind of make a life on this American continent. He was shipwrecked in 1511.
Wow.
And so he lived a full 8 years before Cortez arrived and the conquest began. He was not the only survivor of his shipwreck. There was a second man who survived, a man named Aguilar. And Aguilar was a priest. And Aguilar they were both enslaved. Aguilar was in a town where he was mistreated, but also where he did not take part in the life of the indigenous people there, the Mayans. Gonzalo was enslaved, but was interested, learned the language, took part, helped out, eventually got into the war parties, fought a jaguar, and strangled it with his bare hands, although it took his eye. Eventually married into the royalty of the family, tattooed his body, had children, and then Cortez arrived. And so we don't know a great deal about what happened, but we know that this happened. And we do know that Gonzalo refused to help Cortez and actually fought him and died at some point. So I'm writing about that.
Where are you finding these stories that are so fascinating and that are historical, of course, and that, but I mean...
I'm just looking all the time.
Hence the book, with your little notebooks.
Yeah, and okay. I'm reading all the time, and I'm always looking at my feed. I'm not any different from anyone else with all the newspapers, the Washington Post and the Guardian and whatever, and I'm always, every day I'm looking. I'm looking for entertainment's sake, but I'm also looking for ideas. And just to find the idea is not enough. It needs to be in a constellation with maybe a group of ideas, some memories, some lived experiences, and some big questions. When I can get that constellation going, then I know I can write something.
Where did that concept come from for you?
I must have made it up, but I did make it up based on some great teachers. I had some great teachers, and I still do. But I'm not satisfied. I guess I like a hero sandwich.
Sure.
I don't necessarily, I like a Cuban sandwich, a nice pressed sandwich to eat. But when I'm writing, I like it thick.
Sure. So when you're talking about those constellations, you mentioned 3 things. Is it always those 3 things? Or are there a 4th and 5th sometimes? Or
could be more than 4 or 5.
Okay.
But I think I'm not satisfied if I just have a good story. Okay. Or I'm not satisfied if I found a great character. I'm not going to throw either of them away, but I'm not ready. I'm not ready until I can get them to a moment where, I don't know, they're pondering their future, the death of a loved one, a divorce, a child, something that they've feared, something that they've held secret. And it has to then resonate within me for something that I may not be willing to tell you about in a podcast, but it has to be something that I've at least considered. Or I have to have been there. The thing with Gonzalo Guerrero is I was involved with a movie that took me into the Yucatan. And so I was in some forests, vegetation so thick like the Wallowa forest, but this is in tropical forest, 100-degree temperatures, panthers and jaguars in the vicinity. So I felt as if, that hasn't changed. I'm sure this man had that 10 times, 20 times that, but at least I've been there too. So I can feel the story with my experience.
You touched on having a good story and having a great story and a great character. What makes a great character?
I think definitely possibility of doing something great for not only for oneself but for others, and then tremendous weakness, usually hidden but not hidden well enough. So I guess I'm talking about something pretty Greek in the end.
Okay.
That it's about a young king, Oedipus or otherwise, who doesn't realize, and usually until it's too late, that it's they, because I often have female characters, that they have to deal with something or else they're not going to get through it. I don't always write tragedies, so it doesn't always have to end up in tragedy. It could, but that they have to deal with their past. They have to confront their fear, the possibility that the thing that they've hidden so deeply is going to be out in front of the world. That's why so much of what goes on around us and people outing each other all the time and press and, online and all of this, is so painful to all of us, but in another way, I do think it is almost the stuff of drama. And then we wonder, how do they survive? How do they make a new life for themselves? Is there any way to how do we deal with the injustice? Courts are not good enough usually. Almost feel like drama is the best way.
Sure, yeah.
Because I don't know who needs to get political, but whether we're talking about the 24 election, people don't get their just desserts. Mm-hmm. Actually, they heap indignity upon injustice, upon sheer crime, and get away with it. Mm-hmm. So maybe the best way to deal with criminals is to write a play about them.
Interesting, okay. Where can people find your work?
My stuff is, I have a few collections. So if you look under Oliver Mayer, you'll find probably 4 different collections of my work. But I'm mostly interested in my new stuff. So come out and see my stuff. Come see Ghost Waltz at Los Angeles Theater Center, LATC. We start previews on April 25th. We're lucky. Nice. We got 6 previews before we open on May 4th. We'll play through June 2nd. And then, what else I got? I've got stuff coming up. I have a website that I need to work on. I'm also reachable through USC, where I am a professor at School of Dramatic Arts. And I don't have a social network presence. That's what
the final question usually is, are you on the socials?
I do not. And that's probably really irritating to a lot of people, but I have more time in the day, don't I, to play with my cat.
Yeah.
And my wife will occasionally, Marlene Forte, will post something about me, like at the moment with Ghost Waltz. I figure at this point everyone else has some social profiles, so I can kind of hitch a ride occasionally.
There you go. Wonderful. Well, Oliver Mayer, thank you for coming on to the Playwright Spotlight.
It's been my pleasure.
Thank you for tuning into this episode of Playwright Spotlight. Again, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment down below, and share this channel with a friend. If you're listening to us on your favorite podcast platform, be sure to leave a 5-star review and subscribe to the channel. And in the meantime, and until we see each other again, keep writing.